Live Aid from London with BBC TV and Radio 1.
9:30. More music like that in a minute. But first of all,
Radio 1.
and in the newsroom, it's Frank Partridge.
Rock fans are arriving in their thousands at Wembley Stadium for today's big Live Aid charity concert. Billed as the greatest show on earth, it features many of the world's top performers.
Radio 1 presents One Day That Shook the World, a celebration of July 13th, 1985.
The one thing that even Bob had no control over was the weather. But whoever was watching from up above seemed to approve of the idea. The sun beamed down. It was a beautiful warm day as the crowds waited outside.
I was up in the gantry when the gates were opened at Wembley, and I saw people streaming in. And of course we'd had several days of rather poor weather, inclement weather, and all of a sudden here was a beautiful Saturday. The 13th was absolutely marvellous. The sun was beating down, people were coming in with their bathing costumes on and goodness knows what else, in groups, and you could feel a warmth of emotion welling up from the field itself at Wembley Stadium. And I felt very emotional at that moment, but I felt so emotional when the whole thing started and we had the Royal Salute and so on. Tears came into my eyes and I thought, my goodness me, if I'm crying at this stage, where will it end?
It's 12 noon in London, 7 a.m. in Philadelphia, and around the world it's time for Live Aid. 16 hours of live music in aid of famine relief in Africa. Wembley welcomes their Royal Highnesses, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
There are just a few days in each person's life that really are unforgettable, and for many people, Live Aid was one of those days. It was the day when a Newcastle couple donated £1,000 cash they'd been saving as a deposit on their new house. It was the day the Dubai government gave £1 million, and a little old lady of 70 rang the BBC and said that she was listening to the whole 16 hours, even though she didn't like the music because she thought it was a great idea. It was the day that Princess Diana didn't want to leave the concert at the appointed time. She was enjoying herself so much. The day that 13 cameras, 342 microphones and 40 miles of cable were humped into the Wembley Stadium to feed no fewer than 11 satellites and 1.5 billion people around the world. But when the original announcement had been made by Bob that May, it had all sounded manageable. Complex, but manageable.
And they start the second part of their programme by announcing Live Aid, which without a doubt will be the largest pop concert ever held with the greatest audience and certainly the most important artists of the last 20 years all taking part in one concert in one day on two continents.
Now the real problems arrived with the actual concert, as Radio 1 producer Dave Atkey remembers.
Bob had arranged for 2 clocks to be one either side of the stage, and I think if Bob had had his way, we'd have a large clock slung somewhere in the middle of the arena so that the bands couldn't fail to see what time they were supposed to go on and what time they were supposed to come off. But he did say to them all, on sort of almost pain of death, if you run over, he will just revolve the stage. He will just press that button physically himself, and they will get cut off in their prime. To this point, Status Quo, and I think all the bands were very scared of actually overrunning, and Status Quo were down, I think, to do 4 numbers, and suddenly they went into their last number with about 5 or 6 minutes still to spare, and finished 3 or 4 minutes early. It came backstage to us for Janice Long to do some filling, some interviews, and poor girl, she was absolutely petrified because there was nobody there to interview, nobody to talk to. And our interview area was about 40 yards away from where they came off stage, so I scuttled down there, grabbed Rick Parfitt and Francis Rossi and brought them up to Janice, who, as I was walking them up, the look on her face of pure relief that there was somebody to actually talk to was amazing. So she did her 5 minutes filled to time, and on went the next band.
No one really wanted to get off stage. Everyone was sort of wandering about. And I turned around and Fish was there, who I'd sort of met earlier in the day, and he was saying, what a bum it was that he couldn't play, because like Kaylee had just been a hit, so Marillion was still on the up and coming. And he said, I'd love giving anything to play her. And I turned round and he's like a big bloke. I mean, he's like 6'6", and he picked me up and he embraced me and he was crying his eyes out. And it was unbelievably emotional experience. I mean, you know, for this big, huge Scot, you know. And he's been a good mate ever since.
Elvis Costello sang All You Need Is Love at Live Aid.
You know, the thing with Live Aid, it set a precedent. I mean, maybe these things just come around in every generation. Live Aid didn't change a damn thing. You know, it didn't change anything. It changed their lives, but it didn't change anything in the long term. It didn't change the situation. It changed the circumstances of a few people, but the amount of money that was actually raised, as large as it was and as wonderful as it was tiny compared with the element of the problem, and also tiny in terms of what the governments could have just given it like this.
Live Aid from London with BBC TV and Radio 1.
But Live Aid wasn't all good. A few noses were put out of joint. Boy George wouldn't appear without Marilyn. Huey Lewis and the News pulled out. Frankie Goes to Hollywood flatly refused to take part. And Tears for Fears claimed they were emotionally blackmailed. But now that a year, less a day, has passed, how do people who did perform feel about it? Here's Sting.
Well, I think it was one of the best days for rock and roll ever. And I remember Bob wanting to get to the Royal Box, and rather than go through the crowd and go through the tunnel and up the stairs, he climbed over the crowd to get there, which is very Bob Geldof, and very, very charming. And you got to cheer for it. I remember that.
Roxanne, you don't have to put on the red light. Those days are over. You don't have to sell your body to the night. Live Aid from London with BBC TV and Radio 1.
Howard Jones stepped diffidently in front of the 72,000-strong crowd at about 10 minutes to 4.
The feeling on the day was very special. When I stepped out towards the piano, I remember Phil Collins came up to me and told me to be careful for the stiff keys on the piano. I think it was Freddie Mercury's piano or something. And I took several breaths and walked out there. And I think it's the most nervous that I've felt doing a gig for a long, long time. But like all the nerves went as soon as I sat down, because the feeling coming back from the audience at Wembley was really incredible. And Hide and Seek has always been a very special song for me, and I think I was smiling the whole way through it.
But on July the 13th, David Hepworth and Janice Long, with BBC radio and television outside broadcast crews, all working for 10 hours, with the barest of running orders, no scripts, and often no clear idea of what was happening. Here's Mike Appleton.
There's a thing I still chuckle about, which was the insert from Moscow, which got queued off quite well on time, and we were all pleased about that because it was a fairly rare occurrence for Moscow to come in live on anything like this, certainly in the area of music, or rock music as well. Anyway, got them queued off on the air, and up came these pictures of cherry pickers, you see, and we thought, gosh, we didn't realize that the Russians were into videos, you know, we didn't know they were this far advanced. Anyway, it went on for a little while, and the cherry pickers kept on picking the cherries, and kids sort of dancing along gleefully, school kids, and we thought, well, this is probably something really meaningful in Russian, because the lyrics were in Russian, and we didn't know what they were about. And then somebody started talking at the other end, and we thought, well, that's very strange to have talking over a video. This is really going into realms that we in the West haven't gone into yet. And it suddenly dawned on us that maybe it wasn't a video we were watching, and it turned out that we were watching Romanian television's pictures, but getting Russia's sound. So that was a moment of mild hilarity, a little bit of panic at one stage, but once we got the pictures right, then we all had a giggle.
Good a day as we're having, and please give us as much money as we know you have, like everybody else around the world.
Lest we forget while we're here, I'd like to introduce a video made by CBC Television. The subject speaks for itself. Thank you. Good night. Please send your money in.
Radio producer Dave Atkey was watching from the side of the stage.
Certainly the most moving point was when we were backstage with a couple of members of Queen, Roger Taylor, and I think it was Brian May, I can't remember. And on came the CBS video with Drive, and we just all stood and watched the monitor. And when it finished, they came straight over to them, and there was Roger Taylor wiping the tear. And I mean, it really was, I mean, we were just actually incredibly choked. I mean, every time I saw it, every time I hear the song now, I have to almost walk away from the radio because it brings back that video and that whole day.
Who's gonna tell you when it's too late?
Live Aid was undoubtedly the most elaborate single outside broadcast the BBC's ever done. But there were one or two hiccups. Here's producer Stuart Grundy.
Sitting in the car, listening to the sound, suddenly The Who came on and disappeared. And that was a terrible shock, because I know that it wasn't easy for The Who to get their act together, literally, for that particular performance. They weren't, there was a lot of tension in the air, and it was just so very, very sad that their performance should be the one that suffered. I thought at first, of course, that it was the car radio, but one always does. I mean, the BBC doesn't make mistakes like that. But in fact, we just had a terrible power supply failure. There must have been such a power drain at Wembley at that particular moment.
Producer Chris Lycett was sitting in Radio 1's mobile studio with his engineer when the world went dark and silent.
Mike Robinson, who's the engineer, whose ambition it has been for years to work with The Who, work on The Who's sound, and had always said that once he'd worked with The Who, then he saw that as the climax of his broadcasting career. And we were all quite sure that, having achieved this, he might leave. However, he saw the fact that the power failure there was some kind of divine intervention, and saw this as a escape clause, so he's still with us.
When the lights went out, there was a bit of a pause, and then out came the cigarette lighters. And by that meagre illumination, the rehearsal continued.
Live Aid from London with BBC TV and Radio 1.
Everybody seemed to dress up for Live Aid, except the audience. The day was a hot one, and most people took off whatever they could. On stage, though, for most people, it was Sunday best. Brian Ferry looked like the cover of Vogue, the Spans were immaculate, and Elton John? Well, Elton kept the standards up by wearing a velvet smoking jacket.
I wanted to be there and I wanted to see it all.
Yeah.
So I went up on stage about the first 2 or 3 acts, and I got chucked off stage because, I mean, there was so much going on. It was a nightmare. And they said, listen, we're going to have to throw you off. So I watched on television. We cooked, and it was a fabulous day. There'll never be another day in rock and roll history when those amount of people have been on one stage together, either in America or Great Britain. And anybody who missed the opportunity of being there or being invited to play and who didn't do it is a fool. And it was a wonderful experience. I get goosebumps singing about it. And Bob Geldof, anyone can slag him off. The man was a genius, and he's the only person I know who could have got that together. And it was a very, very worthwhile. I've never seen that amount of musicians get on so well together for one day. It was like, we'll have a ceasefire for a day, you know. And it was great, and it was done, especially the British side of it, I must hasten to add, was done, I thought, with immense taste. And the American, I found the American show didn't have any young American bands. Why weren't Talking Heads on it and things like that? I don't know. I missed that sort of thing. But I enjoyed it. It was fabulous. And I think everybody everywhere throughout the world has entered into what they thought was the right spirit of it. And that's it's an incredible achievement when you look back on it, to get that amount of people on one stage in 3 months. Are you serious? It's bad enough to get me on stage in 3 months on one show of my own.
I can't lie. No more of your darkness.
How much in the end did you actually raise?
We got close to $100 million. We spent about 65 million of that so far. Going on those sort of expenditure figures, we estimate that the remainder will be spent by December. If not, then Band Aid will continue until it has been spent. I mean, we haven't really taken into account yet the influx of money from Sport Aid, obviously, but most of that money will be divided up between the agencies themselves. Most of the $65 million so far spent has gone on long-term development, as we said it would, and that ranges really from anything from restocking farmers with livestock, to building dams, to food research, to setting up little small industries in cities, to beekeeping, to water, to a million things, experimental agriculture research stations, a lot of things like that. The most obvious, I suppose, manifestation of it would be in the bridge that has just been built in Chad. It's over a place called the Larry River, which is really a lifeline between southwest Chad and the Cameroons. where most of the food into Chad comes across this river. Now, in 1984, rain swept away the bridge, and thus depriving 3 regions, that's 1.5 million people, of food coming in, or indeed anything being able to go out. And so they did a sort of mini Dunkirk with little dugout canoes and rafts, but at one point there were 200 trucks stacked up in one direction, and the food that they carried from the coast started rotting. So it is an economic as well as an aid sort of project.
When does that open?
It opens on Sunday, and it was funded jointly by USA for Africa and Band Aid, and it cost about $1.5 million. And they want to call it Music Bridge, which is quite nice.
Absolutely. What is the future of Band Aid, though?
Band Aid must stop because it was something that worked by its very nature. To continue with the same nature is to really make it a professional outfit in every sense, like where there's like sort of money's been spent like on offices and all those sort of things, and we become simply an aid agency as opposed to something that is far more use as almost a political lobby and as a means of making people think about other people, which is probably the biggest long-term effect that Band Aid will have. So, I mean, I leave it with regret, but I feel almost certain that it must actually end rather than continue, because it could continue. I mean, we could set up trusts where that the profit on the money continues and it funds things ad nauseum into the future. But if another situation develops similar, then the possibilities are there for someone else to do the same sort of thing. I mean, the main thing that Band-Aid did was open up the avenues of possibility so that no longer can you really sit in front of your TV and say, it's terrible, but what the hell can I do? At least with, someone will be able to say it's terrible and I can do something, because if nothing else, we prove that individuals, and the massive individuals, can actually affect change on the planet, and more than anything else, that might be the long-term reasoning behind it.
Live Aid from London with BBC TV and Radio 1. Live Aid from London. Live Aid from London, around the world. Live Aid from London with BBC TV